Reginald Odom believed in three things the way other men believe in religion: in showing up early, in keeping his word, and in never letting a single person see the moment when something finally broke him inside. He had built Odom Architecture and Design from a folding table in a one-bedroom apartment in Charlotte to a firm with 11 full-time employees, 2 satellite offices, and a reputation that preceded him into rooms he hadn't entered yet. He was 47 years old. He had a prostate cancer diagnosis that was 8 months old, and a prognosis his oncologist described as manageable with consistent treatment and reduced stress. His oncologist did not know Portia. On a Wednesday morning in March, Reginald was at his kitchen island reviewing structural drawings for a mixed-use development in uptown Charlotte. The coffee was fresh. The light through the east-facing window was doing that particular thing it does in early spring, when the sun is still low enough to come in at an angle that makes ordinary rooms look like something worth painting. He had always noticed light. His mother said it was because he spent so long in buildings that he started thinking about them the way painters do. He heard her before he saw her. Portia came down the stairs the way she always did when she had already decided something. Heels first, deliberate, each step placed with the precision of a person who has rehearsed the weight of their own arrival. She was 34. She had the kind of confidence that photographs well and wears thin in person. She was already in full makeup at 7 in the morning, dressed in something that suggested she had somewhere to be immediately afterward. She set a folder on top of his drawings. Not placed, set. The kind of placement that is really a statement. Reginald looked up. "I want out," Portia said. Her voice was composed. She had clearly said those words to herself in the mirror, enough times that they no longer cost her anything to say. "I've had Darren look at everything. I'm taking the firm's primary account, the Lakeview property, and the studio building on Morrison." She smoothed the front of her blazer. "And I'll need the investment accounts, the joint ones, all of them." Reginald was quiet. "Nadia stays with you," she added, almost as an afterthought. She reached for her phone. "She's 17. She doesn't need me managing her schedule on top of everything else I'm building." From the hallway that opened onto the kitchen, there was no sound at all. Then there was the sound of a backpack sliding off a shoulder and hitting the hardwood floor. Nadia had come downstairs for breakfast 20 minutes early because she had a pre-calculus quiz, and she studied better on a full stomach. She was standing at the edge of the kitchen in her school uniform, dark blazer, white collar, one sock slightly lower than the other, holding a granola bar she had not yet opened. She was looking at her mother with an expression that a 17-year-old should never have to wear on a Wednesday morning before the school bus comes. Portia glanced at her daughter. "You'll understand when you're older," she said, not unkindly, which was somehow the worst version of that sentence. Then she opened her phone, tapped the camera, and walked toward the front door, already composing her expression into the one she used for content. By the time the door closed, she was already speaking into the lens in the warm, practiced voice her 62,000 followers had come to expect. Something about new seasons, something about choosing yourself. Reginald had not moved. He reached across the island and straightened the structural drawing. Portia's folder had disturbed. His hand was steady. Oncologists talk a lot about minimizing physical stress. They say less about what it costs to sit completely still while the architecture of your life comes down around you in a single 7-minute conversation. He looked up and found his daughter standing in the kitchen doorway, still holding the granola bar. He did not offer her empty reassurance. He did not perform calm he didn't have. He said, "Come sit down," and he poured her a glass of orange juice, and they sat at the island together in the kind of silence that is not empty, the kind that is full of things two people know about each other without needing to say. This was not the end of something. People who build things understand this instinctively. Before anything rises, there is always a moment where the ground has to be cleared. Reginald Odom had been clearing ground his entire life. And somewhere in the quiet, methodical mind of a man who had spent 2 decades learning how weight is distributed, how structures hold, and where the load-bearing elements of any given thing actually live. A plan that had been sitting in legal dormancy for 11 years clicked into motion with the soft, unhurried precision of something that was always meant to open exactly now. By 9 o'clock that same morning, Reginald was seated across from his attorney, a woman named Patricia Sue, who had been practicing family and property law in Charlotte for 22 years and who had, in that time, developed a particular talent for listening to the space between what clients said and what they actually meant. He slid the folder Portia had left across the desk without commentary. Patricia read it. She set it down. She looked at him over the frames of her glasses, the way you look at someone when what they've handed you is both worse and more complicated than you were prepared for. "She's claiming the Morrison Studio building," Patricia said. "I know. Reginald, that property was appraised at $2.1 million last fall." "I know that too. She's also claiming the Lakeview account. That's the Meridian Group retainer. Your largest active client." "Yes." Patricia set down her pen. "Walk me through what you want. I want you to give her what she's asking for." The silence in that office lasted approximately 4 seconds, which in the context of a conversation like that one is a long time. "Repeat that. Draft the agreement to include every asset she's listed. The studio, the Lakeview account, the investment accounts." He folded his hands on the desk. "With one condition she will not be able to negotiate around. Portia must permanently relinquish all legal claims to Nadia, custody, visitation rights, and any future petitions, irrevocable and documented." Patricia leaned back slowly. She had heard a great many things in 22 years of practice. She took a moment with this one. "You understand what you're proposing to walk away from?" "I understand it completely." "I'm not sure you do. The Morrison building alone." "Patricia." His voice was even. It was the voice of a man who had already run every number in his own head and arrived somewhere his attorney hadn't reached yet. "She wants her freedom. Give it to her. All of it. Right up until the point where it stops feeling like freedom." Patricia Sue studied him for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. "I need you to understand," she said, "that I'm going to ask you several times whether you're certain, and each time I ask, I need you to know I'm asking, because this is the kind of decision that cannot be unmade." "I understand." She didn't fully believe him, but she wrote it down anyway. 6 weeks later, Portia Odom signed the divorce settlement at a conference table on the 22nd floor of a downtown office building. She wore a structured cream blazer and a calm, assured expression that had been calibrated for exactly this kind of moment. 12 minutes after leaving the building, she posted to her platform the chapter that had to close so the real story could begin. Coffee cup in frame. Morning light from a window. 3 emojis. The comments filled immediately with fire and heart, "And you deserve this." And she's so strong in variations of approval that had, by that point, become the primary currency she ran her life on. She tagged the photographer. His name was Brennan. He was 29, had excellent bone structure, and had been in Portia's life for just over a year in a capacity that predated the word divorce by several months. In a story she posted that evening from a restaurant with warm lighting and very good stemware, they looked exactly like 2 people who believed the hardest part was behind them. They had absolutely no idea it had not yet begun. Reginald and Nadia moved into a 3-bedroom house in Dilworth. It was not large. It had a front porch that caught the afternoon light, and a kitchen that smelled like the previous owners had spent real time in it, which Reginald appreciated in the specific way people appreciate signs that a space has been genuinely lived in. He had grown up in smaller houses than this. He knew how rooms fill up. Nadia did not transition gracefully. She was 17, which is a difficult age to be under the best circumstances, and these were not the best circumstances. The first week, while they were unpacking, she found a framed photo from a family trip to the Outer Banks. The three of them at the waterline, Nadia maybe 10, laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. She stood in the hallway holding it for a moment. Then she set it face down on the hallway table and went to her room. Reginald left it face down. He understood some things need to stay closed until the person holding them decides when to turn them over. 3 days after they moved in, Nadia came to find him in the home office he'd set up in the smallest bedroom. He was reviewing a permit application. At 11 at night, his reading glasses low on his nose, a prescription bottle on the corner of the desk that he hadn't yet gotten around to putting away. She looked at the prescription bottle. He looked at her. "I know you're sick," she said. It was not a question. She had clearly known for some time and had clearly been carrying it alone. He took his glasses off. He set them on the desk. "I have prostate cancer," he said. "Stage 2, caught early. I'm in treatment." He said it plainly, the way a doctor delivers information, not to minimize, but because the truth, stated clearly, is less frightening than the shape of a thing you can only see in shadow. My oncologist is cautiously optimistic. My job is to manage stress and show up for treatment consistently. Nadia sat down on the edge of the guest chair across from his desk. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want the fear of it to land on you before I understood it myself." He looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry, that was the wrong call. You deserved to know." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you didn't fight back when she took everything?" He almost smiled. Not with humor, with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a question because he's been holding the answer in reserve. "I didn't not fight," he said. "I just fought differently." She looked at him. "There are things you don't know yet," he said. "Things that aren't safe to know until the right moment." She held his gaze for another second. Then she stood up, picked up the prescription bottle from the corner of the desk, and set it beside the water glass where he'd actually be able to reach it without looking. Then she went back to her room. He sat in the quiet and let himself feel the exact weight of that small, unremarkable gesture. A 17-year-old girl moving a prescription bottle 2 feet to the left. He had built structures that would outlast him by 100 years. Nothing he had ever designed had felt more solid than that. Meanwhile, Portia was thriving, or performing thriving, which, in the attention economy she had built her identity around, amounted to the same thing until it didn't. She moved into the Morrison studio building, which was the property she had specifically wanted. It was a converted warehouse space in Noda, exposed brick, high ceilings, the kind of industrial aesthetic square footage that photographs like a magazine spread. She turned it into a content studio, new lighting rigs, a backdrop wall she had custom built, a kitchenette stocked for the aesthetic rather than actual cooking. She posted the renovation in 17 parts. She tagged her sponsors. She used the words reclaimed and intentional, and aligned in ways that were not technically incorrect. Her follower count grew. She had Reginald's name removed from the building's business registration. She filed the updated paperwork herself and posted a photo of herself, signing it with the caption, "Signing your name to your own story hits different." Brennan was there for most of this. He was good at being present in a photogenic way. He was less good at the parts of the conversation that happened with cameras off. It was at a design industry mixer, 8 weeks after the settlement, that Reginald understood, with full clarity, what the next season was going to require of him. He had gone to meet a contractor he'd worked with for 6 years. A real meeting, not a social one, the kind where both parties know what they're there for. He was barely through the door when he heard Portia's voice carrying across the room with the particular projection of someone who has spent years ensuring they are heard. She was at the bar, Brennan beside her, and 3 people Reginald knew from professional circles who had, apparently, made a choice about which table they sat at now. Portia saw him. Her eyes moved over him with a deliberateness that was not casual. He was wearing a jacket she had seen before, modest, understated, nothing like the things he used to wear to industry events when they were married. "Oh," she said, To no one in particular, voice carrying. Still doing the small batch boutique firm thing? Soft laughter from the table. Brennan leaned in and said something that made two of the three people smile. Reginald stood still. The specific low-grade pain that lived in his lower back had moved into its evening mode. He felt it, and then he set it aside the way he had learned over 8 months to set it aside, which is to say he continued to stand upright and breathe at the same rate. He looked at the faces at that table. Men and women he had referred clients to. People who had eaten dinner at his house. He looked at each one. Then he nodded, once, to no one in particular, turned, and walked out. He had not come for them. He had what he came for. There is something most people don't think about when they look at a building and decide they want to own it. You can own the walls. You can own the floors and the fixtures and the windows and the view. You can own the business registration and the renovation and the ring lights and the custom backdrop. But in North Carolina, there is a specific and not widely understood distinction between owning a structure and owning the parcel of ground beneath it. And in certain commercial properties, particularly converted structures in neighborhoods that went through development agreements in the early 2000s. The ground lease arrangements were built into the original acquisition in ways that most buyers and most attorneys who don't specialize in commercial real estate never bother to unpack. Portia's attorney had not unpacked it. Reginald had known about it for 11 years. He had structured the Morrison acquisition around it on purpose, not because he was planning for a divorce that hadn't happened yet, but because he was an architect who thought about foundations, and the most important question he asked about every piece of ground he acquired was, who actually owns what's underneath? The Morrison studio building was Portia's. The land it sat on had been held in a separate property trust since 2013, a trust named, with characteristic quiet, for his daughter. Nadia Odom had been 6 years old when her father made her the beneficiary of a ground lease trust for a commercial property in Noda, Charlotte. He had explained it to Portia once, early in their marriage, the way he explained most structural things, clearly, without performance, as a matter of how things actually worked. She had said it sounded like something an accountant would find interesting. He had agreed and moved on. Now it was 2 months after the settlement. The Morrison studio had been fully renovated and was running at capacity. Portia had just finalized a brand partnership that would bring a camera crew in for 2 days of filming. She had told her platform about it in a story that got 14,000 views in 4 hours. On a Thursday evening, while Portia was doing a live Q&A for her followers. Ring light on, studio visible behind her, the aesthetic she had built her post-Reginald identity around in full and careful display. The front buzzer of the Morrison building sounded. She gestured off-screen for Brennan to get it. He came back with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something still and evaluating. He had a manila envelope in his hand and a look that said he had already read the cover page through the clear window in the front. "There's a process server downstairs," he said, keeping his voice low. She laughed right there in the frame and gestured toward the camera in the way she had learned to turn inconveniences into content. "Hold on, beauties, we have a little interruption." She lowered her voice theatrically. "My ex-husband sending paperwork to my studio during my live." 14,000 people watched her open the envelope. They watched her expression change. Not dramatically. Just the specific, quiet shift that happens when a human face receives information the body has not yet figured out how to process. A stillness that is different from composure because composure is chosen and this was not. Notice of ground lease obligations outstanding, payable to the Nadia Calloway Odom Property Trust. And below that, a payment schedule she had never seen and a balance she was not prepared for. The live chat moved fast, too fast for her to read. She looked up, not at the camera, not at Brennan. She looked at a fixed point in the middle of the room, with the specific expression of someone who has just realized that the floor they are standing on is not the floor they thought it was. She recovered quickly. She was good at that. "This is just a scare tactic," she said, into the camera, voice resettled. "He can't accept the outcome. This is what insecurity looks like when someone can't let go." She held up the envelope. "We are not going to let someone else's energy disrupt what we've built here." 14,000 people watched. Most of them typed their support immediately. 2 of them were attorneys. They said nothing in the chat. Brennan stood near the studio door long after the live ended. He had his phone in his hand. He was running the numbers on the payment schedule with the particular focus of a man who is calculating, very quietly, where he does and does not want to be when the next invoice comes due. He said twice that she should call her attorney, not in the morning. Tonight. She said it was a pressure tactic. She redirected with a touch to his jaw. She was very good at redirecting. He smiled. But something behind the smile was already doing arithmetic. 11 miles away, in the Dilworth house, Reginald sat on the front porch with a mug of decaf his oncologist had switched him to, and a silence that had become, over the past several months, less like an absence, and more like a companion he had come to rely on. He could not see the Morrison building from here. He did not need to. In a folder on the porch table beside him was a copy of the original trust instrument, 11 years old, drafted by a property attorney named August Fielding, who was one of the most methodical real estate trustees in the state of North Carolina, and one of perhaps 4 people in Reginald's life who had ever fully understood how his mind worked. He thought about Nadia, about the way she had moved the prescription bottle 2 feet to the left without making it a moment. About the pre-calculus quiz she had told him she probably aced. About the college applications she had started researching on her own without telling him, because she was 17 and doing things independently was how she was beginning to understand herself. This was not about Portia. He was clear about that, in the way that people are clear about things that took a long time and a significant amount of pain to understand. It was about making sure that when Nadia was old enough to fully see what had happened in this chapter of their lives, she would see a father who had not folded. Not because folding would have been weak, but because what he was protecting was not his pride, it was her future. And those 2 things require entirely different responses. He finished his decaf. He went inside. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. Portia arrived with her attorney and with Brennan, who sat 3 rows back in the gallery, looking like a man who was not entirely certain why he had come, but was maintaining the posture of someone who had decided to see it through. She was wearing a structured charcoal blazer. She had posted a photo from the courthouse steps that morning. Accountability era. What's mine is mine. 1,700 likes in 40 minutes. Inside, Reginald was already at the opposing table. He was wearing a dark blue suit she did not recognize. Nothing ostentatious, just clean and well-fitted, and in a way she could not immediately articulate, entirely composed. He had a leather binder open in front of him. His hands were still. His attention was on the door. Patricia Sue sat beside him, reading glasses in place, expression calibrated to reveal nothing. Portia settled into her chair. She crossed her ankles. She set her bag on the table with the small, quiet authority of someone who has not yet considered losing. At 9:52 a.m., August Fielding entered the courtroom. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, and carried himself with the unhurried confidence of a man who has never been the least prepared person in any room he has entered in the last 30 years. He took a seat in the gallery without speaking to anyone. Portia glanced at him briefly, did not recognize him, returned to her phone. The hearing opened. Her attorney presented with practiced efficiency. The settlement was legally executed. The asset transfer was properly recorded. The ground lease notice was a post-settlement harassment tactic intended to destabilize her client's rightful ownership of a lawfully acquired property. She used the phrases clean title and settled instrument and executed in good faith. She was thorough. She was confident. The judge listened carefully. Then he looked at Patricia Sue. Patricia opened her leather binder and placed the first document on the bar table, with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows precisely where the next sentence leads. Your Honor, I am submitting the original deed structure and trust instrument for the property known as the Morrison Studio Building, located on Morrison Boulevard, Charlotte, North Carolina. Specifically, the Nadia Calloway Odom Property Trust, established 11 years ago, prior to the marriage. Portia's attorney looked up from her notes. The structure of the Morrison Building was conveyed to the petitioner as part of the executed divorce settlement. Patricia continued, That conveyance is valid. It is not in dispute. A pause that lasted perhaps 3 seconds and felt considerably longer. However, the land on which the structure stands has been held in irrevocable trust since the property was originally acquired. That land was never part of the marital estate. It was never subject to equitable distribution, and it was, therefore, never legally available for inclusion in the settlement agreement. She set the document down. The petitioner owns the building. She has not owned, and has never owned, the ground beneath it. The courtroom did not make a dramatic sound. It went quiet in the specific, dense way of rooms full of professionals who have just received information that does not fit the framework they arrived with. The judge reviewed the documents. 1 page, then 2, then 4. He took the time judges take when the answer is resolving itself clearly, but must be arrived at through proper process. The clock on the wall moved through nearly a minute. Then he removed his glasses. The trust instrument is validly executed and legally enforceable. He looked at the accounting summary. The petitioner may own the residential structure located on this parcel. She does not own and has not owned the land on which it stands. The ground lease obligations are valid, outstanding, and due. He looked at the clerk. The clerk read the balance into the record. The number was not small. Portia heard it before she understood it. The way you hear certain information, not as language but as weight, arriving before the brain has finished translating. Something changed in her posture. Her breathing shifted. The color left her face in the specific way it leaves when someone understands, suddenly and completely, that the ground they have been standing on was never theirs. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. Portia did not look at the judge. She did not look at her attorney. She looked at Brennan in the 3rd row. Brennan had been sitting very still for the last 2 minutes. He was doing the arithmetic he had been doing since the night of the live. He had the expression of a man who has arrived at a sum he does not like. He stood slowly, straightened the front of his jacket with both hands, and looked at the gallery, not at Portia. Then he stepped past the 2 people between him and the aisle, walked to the courtroom door, and pushed through it. The door closed with the quiet, mechanical finality of something that has been well maintained and opens and closes correctly every time. In the silence after that sound, you could hear the clock on the wall. The hearing recessed briefly. Water was brought. Her attorney leaned close and spoke in a low, urgent register. Reginald was already gathering his binder. He exchanged a quiet word with Patricia. He had the unhurried bearing of a man who has somewhere to be and every intention of arriving there intact. He did not look at Portia. That was the part that reached her most completely. Not the balance the clerk had read into the record. Not the empty seat in the 3rd row. Not the expressions of the 2 attorneys flanking her. The fact that Reginald Odom, the man she had handed divorce papers to over a Monday morning cup of coffee, the man she had mocked in front of an industry crowd who had laughed on cue, that man did not look at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction. He simply did not look. She understood then, with a clarity that arrives only after other ways of understanding have been exhausted, that she had never really seen him clearly. Not once. In 11 years, the courthouse hallway had the institutional smell of cleaned floors and recycled air. Reginald was nearly at the elevator when he heard his name. Not called, not projected the way she usually projected, said, quietly, and with an unsteadiness that came from somewhere the performance had not reached. He turned around. Portia was in the hallway. Her attorney had stopped near the courtroom doors, giving the moment the respectful distance of someone who knows when to step back. The charcoal blazer that had seemed so deliberate 3 hours ago now seemed like a reminder of a version of herself she could no longer locate. She stood without the composure, not performing it, not managing it, simply present in what had happened. Reginald. Her voice had very little structure left in it. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. She put one hand flat against the wall. Please, I just need more time. I'll handle the lease. I'll liquidate things. I need more time with the building. He stood still. He looked at her, not with cruelty, not with the satisfaction she might have expected from a lesser version of the man she had underestimated. What was in his face was something quieter than either of those. It was the settled, permanent grief of a man who had loved someone genuinely and had spent a very long time understanding clearly who that person actually was. You told our daughter, he said, in our kitchen on a Wednesday morning before school that she didn't need you managing her schedule on top of what you were building. He said it without raising his voice. Those were the exact words. On top of what I'm building, like she was an item on a list. Portia opened her mouth. She heard you. He held her gaze. She was standing 6 feet away. She heard everything. His jaw tightened once briefly and then was still. That is the one thing I will not move past. Not the building, not the accounts, not any of the rest of it. That. He pressed the elevator button. I genuinely hope you find what you're looking for, Portia. He meant it without warmth and without coldness. He meant it as a fact, the way you state facts when you are entirely finished. The elevator opened. He stepped in. Nadia was in the lobby. He had told her not to come. She had arrived anyway, in her school jacket, backpack over one shoulder, sitting in a lobby chair with a paperback open in her lap, in the way of someone who is not actually reading. She stood the moment she saw him. She crossed the lobby without hesitating and put her arms around him. A real hug. The kind that doesn't perform itself. The kind that means something has shifted between two people in a way that will not shift back. He put his hand on the back of her head and held on. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't understand what you were doing. I thought you gave up. She stepped back enough to look at his face. Her eyes were bright. You didn't give up. He put a hand on her shoulder. Some things, he said, have to be built before they can be seen. They walked out into the Charlotte afternoon together. Wide sky. The particular quality of March light that is not yet warm but is no longer cold. Arriving on the threshold of something. The weeks that followed had the quiet, forward momentum of something that had been structured correctly from the beginning. Through the Nadia Calloway Odom Property Trust, drafted 11 years prior and named for a 6-year-old girl whose father had already decided her future was worth protecting. Before she was old enough to understand what that meant, Nadia acquired controlling interest in the Morrison Boulevard parcel, at a structured, legally established rate that was, in the context of Charlotte's current commercial real estate market, a number her college economics class would one day call instructive. The building that Portia had renovated, rebranded, and built her post-marriage identity inside was now, beneath the floors, and behind the walls, and under every ring light and custom backdrop, her daughter's. Portia's financial situation resolved itself in the specific, unglamorous way that financial situations resolve when someone has been spending at a rate that required conditions that no longer exist. The brand partnership fell through after the hearing became a matter of public record. The camera crew booking was quietly canceled. The followers did not leave all at once. They never do. But the content began to feel like a room where the acoustics had changed without anyone moving the furniture. Brennan was unavailable, in the way that certain people become unavailable when the arithmetic stops working in their favor. She reached out to Nadia in November, a message that was careful and genuine in the way that messages are when they are the last version a person can write, after everything easier has already been tried. Nadia read it twice. She sat with it for a moment. Then she called, not because she was ready to forgive, but because she was old enough to understand that refusing to answer was its own kind of carrying. Portia's voice was unsteady in a way Nadia had never heard. She said all the things you say when you have run out of the version of yourself that didn't need to say them. She said she was sorry. She said she was wrong. She said she loved her. She said she knew it didn't fix anything. Nadia listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. When it was finished, there was a quiet. Then she said, "I know you love me in the way you know how to. I'm working on being okay with what that looks like." Another pause. "But I'm not ready for more than that yet. I want to be honest with you about that." Portia didn't say anything. "I'll call you," Nadia said. "When I'm ready, I will call you." She ended the call, set the phone on the kitchen table, went back to the college application essay she had been working on, which was about structural integrity, and the question of what makes something strong enough to outlast the force applied against it. There is a particular quality to the evenings in Dilworth in late fall. The light comes down early and the neighborhood goes warm and quiet before 5 o'clock. Porch lights click on. Someone 2 streets over is always doing something with a grill that sends the smell of it through the whole block. On one of those evenings, Reginald made dinner at home. Something real, not elaborate, but cooked, which was the distinction that had started to matter. Nadia had come home from school with a folder full of preliminary acceptances and the specific energy of someone who is standing at the beginning of something. They ate at the kitchen table, which they had gotten around to clearing. She walked him through the acceptances. 1 school in Atlanta, 1 in Boston, 1 in Philadelphia. She was explaining the architecture programs with the velocity she reserved for things she actually cared about. Her hands moving, her eyes carrying that particular light. He watched her and understood that this was what he had been building toward. Not the settlement, not the hearing, not the ground lease documentation. This, a daughter who knew how to fight for something she loved and how to make a decision on her own terms. He reached for his water glass. "How are you feeling?" she said. She asked it now with the directness of someone who has decided that the real questions deserve to be asked in real time, without waiting for a better moment. He set the glass down. He looked at her. "I had a scan last week," he said. "The treatment is working. They're moving me to a monitoring phase." She held his gaze. "I'm going to be here," he said, "for a long time yet." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and held out her hand. He took it. They stayed like that for a moment. Father and daughter at a kitchen table, in a house that was not large, in a neighborhood that was not famous, in a life that had been reduced to its actual elements, and had turned out, in that reduction, to be exactly enough. Later, after she had gone to her room with her folders and her plans, he stood at the front door and looked out at the street. The porch light was still flickering. They kept meaning to fix it. Neither of them ever did. He thought about the path that had led here. The folder on the kitchen island, the mixer and the faces he had catalogued quietly before walking out, the courtroom and the hallway and the elevator. Walking into the March afternoon with his daughter beside him, he had spent his whole life thinking about foundations, about what holds, about what, when everything above it has been redesigned or demolished or simply walked away from, remains fixed in the ground. He turned off the porch light, flickering as it went, and went inside. 3 things are worth understanding when you've watched someone try to take everything that mattered to another person and discover, too late, that they never understood what the word everything actually meant. The first, document what belongs to your children, not as a legal maneuver, as an act of love, a trust, a deed, a properly titled account. These are the sentences you write so your children can read them after you're gone. 1 phone call to a property attorney can tell you whether what you think you own is titled the way you intend. Make that call. The second, when someone performs at your expense in public, note who laughs. Not to punish them, to see them clearly. You do not owe continued access to anyone who uses your difficulty as entertainment. This includes people who have eaten at your table. The third, and this is the one that stays, the most lasting thing you can give a child is the memory of watching you refuse to collapse. Not perform strength, fuse to collapse. The difference is everything. They will carry the image of you standing upright in a hard season long after the details of what happened have faded from both your memories. That image becomes the floor they stand on when their own hard seasons come. Portia took what she could see. She left behind what held. The Morrison building still stands on Morrison Boulevard. The lights are still on inside. The brick is still exposed. The ceiling's still high. The ground beneath it belongs to a girl from Charlotte who is about to choose between schools in Atlanta, Boston, and Philadelphia, and who is writing her college application essay about what it means to build something that lasts. She learned it from her father.